the smoke hit me before the flames did. I remember that detail so clearly. The way the air turned thick and gray in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, while I was standing in the elevator lobby on the 14th floor of the Hargrove Tower, trying to get my phone to stop buffering so I could pull up my daughter's school pickup reminder. The building fire alarm had been going off for almost 2 minutes already, and nobody was moving very fast because in downtown Chicago, fire alarms go off all the time and it's never anything. A food cart smoke, a coffee machine malfunction, someone's burnt lunch in the break room on 6. Then the elevator shaft exploded. Not an explosion like a bomb. More like a pressure release, a deep percussive boom that rattled the floor under my feet and sent a crack running up the wall beside me, clean as a surgeon's cut. The lights dropped. Emergency lighting kicked in, orange and sickly. Someone screamed from somewhere below, and then the ceiling at the far end of the corridor buckled inward, and the smoke went from gray to black in about 4 seconds flat. I ran back toward the stairwell. The door was already jammed. Something on the other side had shifted. Some structural thing I didn't understand and still don't. I threw myself against it twice before I accepted it wasn't moving. The smoke was getting lower. I got down on my knees, pressed my back against the stairwell door, and pulled my jacket up over my mouth, and I thought about my daughter. She had a fever that morning, 101.4. I'd called my mother-in-law to pick her up early from school, and before I left the house, my little girl had looked at me from the couch with those huge gray eyes of hers and said, "Mommy, stay home." And I'd kissed her for it and told her I'd be back by 5:30. It was now 3:17 p.m. I don't know how long I was in that lobby. It felt like hours. It was probably closer to 18 minutes, according to the fire department report I read months later. What I know is that I spent every one of those minutes certain I was going to die in a building I'd walked through 100 times without once thinking about what would happen if the stairwell was blocked. And the elevators were gone, and the air turned solid. I called my husband. He didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "I'm trapped on 14. Fire. I can't get to the stairs. Please call." 3 dots appeared, then stopped, then appeared again, then nothing. He had read it. I could see the read receipt, that little detail that I will never in my life forget as long as I live. That small gray checkmark that told me he had seen the words "I'm trapped" and "fire" and had chosen not to respond. I found out later why. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The firefighters reached me through a window. An aerial ladder unit from Engine Company 42. 2 guys in full gear who smashed through the glass and told me to grab onto the harness and not to look down. I looked down. I don't know why. Chicago in October, 14 stories below. The street blocked off with trucks and ambulances, and a crowd gathered behind yellow tape. I thought, this is real. This is actually happening. On the ground, a paramedic wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked me to the ambulance. My hands were shaking. My left knee had hit something during the fall against the door. The MRI later showed a torn MCL, but in the moment I couldn't feel it yet. Adrenaline is a remarkable thing. I kept asking about my husband. His name was Declan. Declan Marsh. He worked on the 11th floor of the same building. Different company, but we'd actually met there 3 years before at a rooftop event, which he used to say was the most romantic thing about us. We parked our cars in the same garage every morning, and sometimes got coffee at the place on Madison before going up to our separate floors. I knew he had gotten out. Someone from his office had told me they all evacuated together during the first alarm wave. He was safe. He just wasn't answering. I sat in the back of the ambulance with an oxygen mask on my face, looking at my phone, and my mother called me. She'd seen it on the news. When I told her I was out, I was okay. She started crying so hard I couldn't understand anything she said for almost a minute. "Is Declan with you?" she finally managed. "No," I said. There was a pause. A very particular kind of pause, the kind my mother is very good at, that communicates a complete sentence without using any words. "I'm sure he's just," I started. "I'm sure he is," she said, and that was the end of that conversation. My knee had swollen badly enough by then that the paramedics wanted me to go to the ER. I resisted for 20 minutes because I kept thinking Declan was about to show up, kept thinking I'd see him coming through the crowd. He never came. Eventually, I let them take me. He texted while I was in the triage bay. A single text. "So glad you're safe, crazy day. Tell me when you're done at the hospital and I'll come get you." I read that text 4 times. Then I put my phone face down on the gurney beside me, and I stared at the ceiling of the triage bay at Northwestern Memorial, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Not yet. Something more like a quiet unlocking, like a door I'd been holding shut from the inside had finally swung open on its own. I was in the hospital for 3 days. He visited once on the 2nd day for about 40 minutes. He brought flowers, white tulips, which I told him when we first started dating, were my least favorite because they smelled like nothing. And he sat in the chair beside my bed and asked reasonable questions about my knee and whether the doctor had said anything about physical therapy. And then he looked at his phone twice and said he had to get back. To what? I asked. He said there was a situation at work. Things in the building were disrupted. People needed to be reorganized. He was helping coordinate. You didn't answer when I called, I said. During the fire. I called twice. He said he hadn't heard it ring. He said the noise was chaos. Everyone was trying to evacuate. He hadn't had a second to think. I looked at him. I'd been with this man for 6 years. I knew his face the way you know a room you've lived in a long time. Every corner, every shadow, every place where the light hits wrong. Okay, I said. He squeezed my hand, kissed my forehead, and left. My best friend Opal came and stayed with me the last 2 nights of my hospital stay. We've known each other since college. She's the kind of friend who shows up with your actual favorite foods and doesn't talk about the things you haven't brought up yet. She brought me a real coffee from the place I liked on Clark Street and a paperback thriller, and she sat in the visitor chair. And we watched 4 episodes of a cooking competition show and didn't discuss my marriage once. On the 3rd morning, the orthopedic specialist cleared me to go home with a knee brace, a prescription for anti-inflammatories, and strict instructions about limited weight-bearing for 2 weeks. The discharge nurse handed me a printout of instructions. I texted Declan that I was being released. He said he had a meeting until 4 but could probably come get me around 4:30. Opal drove me. When we pulled up to the house we'd bought together 2 years ago in Lincoln Park, the house with the blue front door I'd painted myself on a Saturday in June, I sat in the passenger seat for a moment and just looked at it. Do you want me to come in? Opal asked. No, I said. I'm okay. She looked at me the same way my mother had paused on the phone. Okay, she said. Call me. The house felt different when I came in. I'd only been gone 3 days. But I noticed things. I always have. Declan used to say it was one of my more exhausting qualities. And I noticed the kitchen smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I noticed a wine glass in the drying rack that had lipstick on the rim, and the color wasn't anything I owned. I noticed that the couch cushions were slightly rearranged in the way they get when someone is sitting in an unusual configuration. I stood in my own kitchen with my knee brace and my paper bag of prescriptions, and I put together a picture I had probably been refusing to put together for much longer than 3 days. I didn't cry. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and thought. When Declan came home at 5:15, not 4:30, 5:15, he looked surprised to see me already there. He covered it quickly, came over and hugged me and said Opal mentioned she'd brought me home. Was that okay? He felt terrible about the meeting running over. Who was here? I said. He stopped moving. What? While I was in the hospital. Who was here in the house? He went through 3 or 4 micro-expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise. Calculation. Something that might have been a flicker of genuine remorse. Then the decision to try a version of the truth that wasn't the full truth. Some people from work came over to kind of decompress after everything, he said. It was a stressful situation, everyone was shaken. One person, I said. One person was here. She left a wine glass. He set his keys on the counter. Isla, that's not my name, I said. A beat of silence. I know that's not your name, he said quietly. Her name, I said, your coworker. The one you helped out of the building. I watched his face very carefully. Everyone at my company had heard about it. Because everyone always hears everything in the connected way that Chicago professional circles work. A woman from Declan's floor, his colleague on the business development team, had twisted her ankle during the evacuation and Declan had essentially carried her out of the building. Which, objectively, was a nice thing to do. A decent human thing. Except that when I had called him from inside that building, from inside the smoke, while my knee was starting to go and the air was turning black, he had read my message and gone back to her. The story came out over the next hour. Not all at once. In pieces, the way these things always come out, pulled like stitches from a wound that was already past the point of holding together. They'd been seeing each other for 7 months. It had started at a client dinner in March. He hadn't meant for it to happen, he said, which is the thing people say when they've made a consistent series of active choices over a period of months, and would prefer to describe it as weather. I let him finish, then I said, I'd like you to stay somewhere else tonight. He wanted to talk. He said we should talk, that we owed it to ourselves and to our daughter to have a real conversation. I told him we would have many conversations through our respective attorneys and that I was asking him now, calmly and clearly, to leave. He left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. Then I called my father. My father lives in Phoenix now. He moved after he retired from the firm he'd built over 30 years. He's the kind of man who doesn't say very much, But what he says lands with a precision that used to terrify me when I was a teenager, and now is one of the most comforting things I know. When I told him everything, the fire, the phone call he didn't answer, the wine glass, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you and the baby safe?" "We're safe," I said. "She's not a baby anymore, Dad. She's 7. She'll always be a baby," he said. "I'm coming out Friday. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He arrived Friday afternoon. He didn't make a big entrance. He came through the door with a carry-on bag and a box of pastries from the Italian bakery I'd loved since childhood. He'd found one in Phoenix that carried them. And he sat at my kitchen table and asked me to tell him the whole thing again, from the beginning, and he listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have a lawyer? Not yet. You need a good one, not a mediator, a lawyer." He reached into his jacket pocket and put a piece of paper on the table. I looked some up before I flew out. These 3 have the best reputations in family law in Cook County. Call on Monday. I looked at the paper. "Dad, I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'll stay as long as you need." The practical thing about having a father who spent 30 years running a business is that he is exceptionally good at logistics in a crisis. He took my daughter to school in the mornings so I could keep my knee elevated. He cooked actual dinners, real ones, the kind that use multiple pans. He sat with me while I made the phone call to the attorney, whose name was at the top of his list, a woman named Constance, who had a very quiet voice and very sharp eyes, and who, when I laid out the situation, said, "We'll need to document the financial picture first. Do you know where he keeps investment account statements?" I did, actually, because Declan had always handled the money, which felt in our marriage like a gesture of care. He liked spreadsheets, he was good at it. Let me focus on other things, but which I now understood had been, at least in part, a way to keep the full picture slightly out of my line of sight. My father helped me go through everything. We found the brokerage accounts, the 401k, the home equity. We found a personal account I didn't know about, opened 3 years ago, with a balance that had no explanation in the context of our household income. Constance's eyebrows did a very specific thing when I sent her those documents. "This is useful," she said. "The divorce took 8 months. It was not pleasant. Declan did not behave particularly well once the legal process began. There was a period of about 6 weeks where he was very focused on the idea that I was being irrational, that I had never fully understood the pressures he was under at work, that I was making things harder than they needed to be. He said these things to mutual friends, who relayed them back to me in the particular way people do when they think they're being neutral. I let Constance handle it. That was what I paid her for. I want to be honest about what that year was like, because I think there's a version of this kind of story that makes the aftermath look cleaner than it is. The truth is that some mornings I got my daughter ready for school and held it together completely, and then sat down in the kitchen, after the door closed, and couldn't move for an hour. The truth is that there were nights I went through my own memories of the marriage, like I was auditing a document, looking for every place I'd missed something. Every moment that now read differently in retrospect, and I'd get to 3 in the morning before I made myself stop. The truth is that I had to tell my daughter, eventually, that Daddy wasn't going to live with us anymore. And watching her face process that information is something I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. But here are some other truths. My mother drove up from Springfield 4 weekends in a row to be with us, and didn't once say anything that started with "I told you" or "I always thought." My friend Opal showed up on a Friday night in February, with 2 bottles of good wine and a whiteboard, and we made a list of every single thing I was going to build in the next 12 months, and it was the most useful evening I'd had in years. My father called every Saturday morning without fail, 7:30 Central Time, and we talked for exactly as long as we needed to, and then he said "talk soon" and hung up, and somehow that rhythm held me together in a way I couldn't fully explain. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I'd stopped painting, actual painting, canvas and oil, something I'd loved deeply before the marriage compressed my free time into something very small. And I started again, badly at first, then less badly. I made a painting of the blue front door of the house, and then I painted over it with something entirely different, and that felt right. My knee healed. Not perfectly. I have a brace I'm supposed to wear for certain activities and a slight ache in cold weather that the orthopedist says is just going to be part of my life now. But I walked without the crutch by week 6, and I was back to most normal activity by the end of the year. The settlement was finalized in June. Declan got the car he cared about and some of the furniture. I got the house, the Blue Door house in Lincoln Park, which I repainted red that summer, with my daughter helping me from the porch step, telling me I'd missed spots, taking the process very seriously. I got a significant portion of the assets, including a court order related to the undisclosed personal account that Constance had handled with the kind of quiet satisfaction that very good attorneys get when the work is done right. He is, as far as I know, still with the woman from his office. I don't track it. I stopped tracking it around month 4 because I decided the space that information was taking up in my brain was not space I wanted to give it. My daughter asked me was in seat, about 6 months after the divorce was final, whether I was mad at Daddy. We were in the kitchen. She was doing homework at the table while I made dinner, which is when she tends to ask the questions she's been saving up. And she didn't look up when she asked it. Just kept her pencil moving on the paper. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered, because she's 7 and she asks real questions and calibrated for 7 but not dishonest. I said, for a while. But not now, not as much, I said. I'm more busy being proud of us. She thought about that. Because we're okay? Because we're more than okay, I said. She went back to her homework. After a minute, she said, your sauce is bubbling. I turned around and took it off the heat, and she went back to her math worksheet, and the kitchen smelled like garlic and tomatoes, and something that had nothing to do with any of the rest of it, something that was just ours. I think about the 14th floor sometimes. I think about those 18 minutes in the smoke, pressing my jacket over my face, certain that was going to be the whole story. I think about the paramedic who wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and said, you did great, even though all I had done was stay low and not panic, which felt like the absolute minimum a person could do. I think about the text with the read receipt. I think about the wine glass with the lipstick that wasn't mine. And then I think about my father at his kitchen table in Phoenix, pulling up family law firms on his laptop on a Thursday night so he'd be ready when I called. I think about Opal arriving at the hospital with a real coffee and a paperback and not requiring me to perform fineness before I was ready. I think about my mother driving 4 hours on a Saturday because her daughter needed her, and not saying I told you so once, which was an act of love so complete it still gets me when I think about it. I think about my daughter looking at me across the kitchen, pencil in her hand, deciding she's old enough to ask the thing she actually wants to know. I was standing in the lobby of a burning building with smoke coming in through the ceiling tiles. And I called the person I thought was my person, and he read it and didn't come. That's true. That happened. What's also true is that people came. Different people. The ones who were always going to come. The ones I maybe didn't see clearly enough because I was looking in the wrong direction. That's the part I hold on to. The sauce was bubbling, and I turned it down. And my daughter went back to her homework, and we are, completely, solidly, unambiguously fine.